The studio lights burned hotter than Jack Nicholson expected. He squinted, his signature grin faltering as he adjusted his tie, the knot suddenly too tight. The audience roared with applause, their faces blurred into a sea of expectation, waiting for the Jack they knew from the screen, the rogue, the charmer, the man who could chew a scene and spit it out with a wink. But tonight, on the Whoopi Goldberg show, something felt off. The air smelled of stale coffee and hairspray, and the hum of the cameras sounded like a swarm of bees circling his head. He wasn't here to promote a movie. He wasn't sure why he was here at all. Jack hadn't been on live TV in years. At 88, he'd retreated from the spotlight, living quietly in his Malibu home, the ocean's rhythm his only script. But when Whoopi's team called, promising a career retrospective and a chance to set the record straight, his curiosity, or maybe his ego, got the better of him. He'd arrived at the studio an hour ago, ushered through a maze of corridors by a young assistant who kept calling him Mr. Nicholson like he was a museum exhibit. The green room had been too bright, the couch too stiff, and the mirror had shown him a face he barely recognized, lined, weathered, but still sharp-eyed. He downed a glass of water, wishing it was whiskey, and muttered to himself, "What the hell am I doing here?" Now, sitting across from Whoopi, her warm smile and quick wit anchoring the stage, he felt the weight of the moment. The audience was still clapping, but their enthusiasm felt like a wave about to crash. Whoopi leaned forward, her dreadlocks catching the light, her voice cutting through the noise. "Jack, it's been a minute. How's it feel to be back in the hot seat?" He chuckled, the sound rough but practiced. "Like I'm about to get grilled, Whoopi. You got that look in your eye." The audience laughed, but he caught a flicker in her expression, something knowing, something dangerous. The first segment was safe. They talked about his early days, Easy Rider, the Oscars, the Lakers games he never missed. Jack leaned into his old charm, tossing out one-liners, letting the audience eat it up. But there was a rhythm to the show he couldn't quite catch. The stage manager's headset crackled too loudly in the quiet moments. The studio smelled of sweat and anticipation, and Whoopi's questions were sharper than they seemed, each one probing a little deeper. "You've played some dark characters, Jack," she said, her tone playful but pointed. "Ever feel like you've lived any of those roles off-screen?" The question hung in the air. Jack's fingers twitched against the armrest, his grin frozen. "She's fishing." He could feel it, the way the cameras zoomed in, the way the audience's laughter died down, waiting for his answer. "Whoopi, I'm just a guy who reads lines." "The darkness? That's all make-believe." But his voice cracked on the last word, and he saw her tilt her head, like a detective catching a lie. The show cut to commercial, and the studio dimmed. Jack's handler, a wiry woman named Claire with a clipboard and a nervous smile, rushed over with a bottle of water. "You're doing great, Mr. Nicholson," she whispered, but her eyes darted to the side, avoiding his. He took the bottle, his hands steady but his mind racing. What's her angle? He'd been in Hollywood long enough to know when a script was being flipped. Whoopi was across the stage, whispering to a producer, her hands animated, her face unreadable. The audience murmured, their voices a low hum, like static before a storm. When the cameras rolled again, Whoopi's tone shifted. "Jack, let's get real for a second," she said, her smile softening but her eyes locked on his. "You've had this incredible career, but there's always been talk. Rumors. Stories. People saying you've got secrets. Care to clear any of that up?" The audience went silent. Jack felt the heat of the lights, the weight of 1,000 eyes. His heart thudded, a slow, heavy beat. She knows something. He thought of the old scandals, the tabloid headlines, the women, the parties, the whispers that never quite died. He'd buried most of it, paid off who he needed to, let time do the rest. But there was one story, one name, that still haunted him. Lila. 30 years ago, Lila had been a nobody, a script supervisor on one of his films. Young, sharp, with a laugh that could cut through the chaos of a set. They'd had a fling, brief, reckless, the kind of thing that happened when you were Jack Nicholson in the 90s. But it hadn't ended cleanly. She'd left the industry, disappeared, and then, years later, a letter had come. Handwritten, shaky, accusing him of things he swore he hadn't done. He'd ignored it, told himself it was a shakedown, but the guilt had lingered, a splinter under his skin. Last month, a blog post surfaced, anonymous but detailed, claiming Jack had ruined someone's life. It didn't name Lila, but he knew. And now, sitting under Whoopi's gaze, he wondered if she knew too. "Secrets," he said, forcing a laugh. "Whoopi, I'm an open book. What you see is what you get." But his voice sounded hollow, and the audience didn't laugh with him. A woman in the front row shifted, her arms crossed, her stare piercing. Jack's throat tightened. Did they all know? Whoopi leaned closer, her voice low, almost intimate. "Jack, I got a letter last week. From someone who says they worked with you. Someone who says you changed their life, and not in a good way." The studio was so quiet he could hear the faint buzz of a fluorescent bulb overhead. His pulse roared in his ears. "Lila." He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The silence stretched, unbearable. The cameras didn't blink, didn't flinch. Jack's hands gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. He could deny it, laugh it off, call it a lie. He was Jack Nicholson, he'd talked his way out of worse. But Whoopi's eyes held him, steady, unyielding, and for the first time in years, he felt exposed. Not the movie star, not the legend, just a man who'd made choices he couldn't outrun. "Jack," Whoopi said softly, "this is a safe space. If there's something you want to say, now's the time." The audience leaned forward, a collective intake of breath. Jack's mind raced. He could see Lila's face, her eyes bright with ambition, then dull with hurt. He hadn't meant to break her, hadn't meant to leave her behind. But he had. And now, here, on live TV, the past was clawing its way out. His voice cracked, and he stopped, swallowing hard. The studio was a pressure cooker, the air thick with expectation. He could lie, deflect, charm his way out. Or he could tell the truth and let the world tear him apart. His chest tightened, his breath shallow. "What's it gonna be, Jack?" The show cut to another commercial, and the tension broke like a snapped wire. The audience exhaled, murmuring, some clapping awkwardly. Claire rushed over again, her clipboard shaking in her hands. "You okay, Mr. Nicholson? Need anything?" He waved her off, his eyes fixed on the floor, where a scuff mark shaped like a crescent moon stared back at him. Whoopi was on her feet, talking to the producer again, her voice low but urgent. "Jack caught fragments, too far? Keep going, he's ready." When they came back from the break, Whoopi's tone was different, gentler, but still firm. "Jack, before the break, we were talking about truth. About owning it. You don't have to say anything, but I think you want to. Am I wrong?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't expected, not judgment, but a kind of compassion. The audience was silent again, but it wasn't the silence of judgment, it was the silence of waiting, of hoping for something real. Jack's hands unclenched, his shoulders sagging. He felt old, tired, but also, strangely, lighter. "I made mistakes," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. The words felt like glass in his throat. "I was young, stupid, caught up in the life. I hurt people. Not on purpose, but I did." He paused, his eyes darting to the audience, then back to Whoopi. "There was a woman. Lila. I didn't mean to ruin her. But I didn't stop it either." The studio was a vacuum, no sound, no movement. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Whoopi nodded, her face unreadable but her eyes steady. "That's a start, Jack," she said. "What do you want to say to her now?" The question hit like a punch. Jack's mind blanked, his mouth dry. He saw Lila's face again, not the young woman from the set but the one he imagined now, older, carrying the weight of years he'd ignored. He wanted to say he was sorry, but the word felt too small, too cheap. He wanted to say he'd changed, but had he? The audience was watching, the cameras rolling, the world waiting to judge. And yet, in that moment, none of it mattered. Only Lila did. "I'd tell her," he stopped, his voice breaking. The studio was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. "I'd tell her I see her now. I didn't then, but I do now. And I'm sorry. His eyes burned, and he blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. The audience was silent, but he felt their presence, their judgment, their empathy. A woman in the back row wiped her eyes. A man nodded, his jaw tight. Whoopi reached out, her hand resting lightly on his. "Thank you, Jack," she said, her voice soft but clear. That took courage. The show didn't end with a bang. There was no dramatic music, no cut to black. Whoopi steered the conversation to lighter topics, giving Jack a chance to breathe, to recover. But the air had changed. The audience clapped, but it was subdued, respectful. Jack smiled, but it was a ghost of his usual grin. As the credits rolled, he sat still, staring at the scuff mark on the floor, the weight of his words settling into his bones. Backstage, Claire hovered, unsure what to say. The producer approached, offering a handshake, but Jack barely noticed. He felt raw, exposed, but also free. For the first time in years, he'd said something true. Not scripted, not rehearsed, just true. As he stepped out into the cool night air, the city humming around him, he heard Whoopi's voice in his head. "What do you want to say to her now?" And he realized he didn't know. Maybe he never would. But for the first time, he wanted to try. Zai artifact. And maybe that's the thing about truth, it doesn't fix the past, but it leaves you wondering, what do we owe the people we've hurt, and how do we live with the pieces we can't put back together?